Hey everyone. Well, it looks like a lot of stuff has been happening inside of Turkey. What I'm saying that is there's a lot of military operations, joint operations with the United States military, with Trump, with Russia, intelligent operations, and it's very interesting what's kind of happening. Last year, I told you that there was arrests happening inside of Turkey, connected over to different terrorist cells, different networks that the Turkey military was taking out all of these different areas. People were being arrested. Now the reports are thousands of arrests. I mean, thousands, 600 here, 300 arrests here, another 250 here, another 800 people arrested. Even all the way up to just a few days ago, over 200 people arrested again. And they're connected to all of this Islamic State, different terrorist networks, terrorist cells. Here's the intel reports that I'm kind of getting, and I'm piecing it together in a certain way, is that these terrorist cells, some of them are connected to NGOs, and inside of Turkey, they have a large base of these NGOs, and there's investigations happening that Trump is pushing forward, and Erdogan is also going to start to push forward on this to expose a lot of different operations connected to these terrorist cells, all of these different networks, that was going to overthrow the country. So what's kind of happening is that they were finding out that a large part of these terrorist networks were being operated also by Israel, the operations of Mossad, connected to finances that was coming from the city of London, running through communist operations all the way into these NGOs inside of Turkey. So behind the scenes, there's a large discussion of breaking these different networks apart inside of Turkey, exposing the operations that's connected also over to Israel. So it's very interesting because these are the wires, these are the reports that's coming out, is that inside of Palestine, the oil, the different networks, even off the coast, you have all these rigs. Israel is trying to capture this, but they're all being cooperated over with Turkey. And they're really upset that Israel is trying to capture these huge, gigantic operations of all the different oil fields that they'd had been planning for a long time throughout the Middle East to grow this huge, gigantic project. You've all heard about this, the Greater Israel, this huge project to make it huge. But the real idea was through oil, through finances throughout the world, projects, and then to start running their world oil, the different reserves throughout the Middle East. And this was Israel's huge, gigantic project, capturing the Turkey operations, Iran operations, all the way up into northern regions, all the way down in towards Iraq, different places near Saudi Arabia. Now, what you're seeing is that Trump intentionally now is uniting with Israel's enemy, Turkey, because they're having this huge, gigantic standoff. Turkey is saying that there's a lot of corruption. They're the people that's behind a lot of these finances of the terrorist networks. And they know what's happening, that Israel is trying to capture all of these different oil networks that belong to Turkey in different regions. And they're upset about that. Now, Trump, publicly stating that they're going to supply missiles to Turkey. They want to supply jets, over to Turkey, and Israel is really upset about that. At the same time, Trump is talking about lifting the sanctions over in Turkey. Now, here's what I'm hearing from the wire reports, is that Turkey was only willing, to make this NATO summit happen, to really move forward with it, only if the base in Israel, a certain base was completely destroyed that had super advanced technology, different particle weapons that they knew about, but then also nuclear weapons and other advanced weapons. So after that explosion happened, that happened over a month ago inside of Israel, now Turkey has began to really trust Trump, trust the United States military, and then to kind of like join these different forces, networks to go after Israel behind the scenes. This is a huge, gigantic project of what Trump is doing. So it's very interesting when we talk about Turkey, because years ago, we know that China was moving missile defense systems going through Turkey, flights going all the way to Serbia. Russia inside of Turkey, helping facilitate operations behind the scene with the military, silent training happening, and then trading also, with Russia. Even buying missile defense systems from Russia. It was the first time that people couldn't understand really that Turkey was a NATO country, was buying weapons over from Russia, and how this was allowed to happen. But behind the scenes, I keep telling you, there's this massive alliance between the United States, what's happening over in China, what's happening with Russia. There's a massive, huge, gigantic alliance, those operations. And I always told you that a large project of this was to kind of bring down NATO, to start to take it apart, to take out the old heads. And what was going to happen was either two things. Either Trump was absolutely going to take NATO fully apart, or else it was going to be taken down, a massive collapse, and then to start rebuilding NATO in a certain way. Now, as you know that, you have commanders from the United States directly, that's heading NATO now, those operations. And at the same time, there's still an infighting inside of NATO. The different countries are in panic because Trump is there, and Trump is going to expose all the operations that's connected to NATO, corruption. This stuff is still going to keep on coming forward because it's going to keep on growing, guys, what's really happening. But this is just a small front right now, because Trump over at the NATO summit over in Turkey, Trump telling the public, that they're telling him that they really love him, the NATO members, everybody inside of NATO, Trump giving that speech. But at the same time, Trump almost didn't go to NATO. That's kind of the reports that's kind of out there. But the real truth is that it seems like everything was absolutely planned from behind the scenes. You have one of the biggest NATO countries, Turkey, that was creating chaos, with NATO for a long time because, they weren't supporting the Ukraine war. There was a lot of things that they weren't supporting inside of NATO. They weren't attending different NATO meetings. Then there was large reports for the past 2 years that they're going to break away from NATO. And NATO was really upset about this, of what was happening. Because if Turkey left, then that would be a massive collapse, because that's the second biggest military is Turkey. Then the United States is the first biggest military that supports NATO. So this was all happening, these 2 years, a lot of different operations. Turkey working with Russia, moving intelligence information. Russia intel satellites working inside of Turkey, and then capturing all of these different terrorist cells, stopping all of these different operations, to where these terrorist operations were supposed to destroy different parts of Turkey, create civil war, create civil unrest, mass casualty events. And there's been a huge, gigantic cleanup that's been happening inside of Turkey. And it's very interesting with the wires and reports saying that these military operations have arrested thousands, and it's still continuing. And they're blocking off all the funds. They're exposing all the operations, and it's going to keep on growing also over to NGOs. And behind the scenes, NGOs is connected to communist operations. And there's a reason why Trump is talking about communism. those operations. And it's actually this huge, gigantic world stage to where they're going to expose communism. Eventually, the world stage of communism is going to collapse. And then the hugest networks behind the scenes, it's going to connect over to China, because eventually United States, China's going to go into this standoff connected to rigging the elections. A lot of people are going to be involved inside of rigging the elections. You have China, you got Serbia, you got Cuba, you got Venezuela, now some other countries are going to be popping up, because here's what's really interesting behind the scenes is that you have the operations of 17, that initially began inside of these operations connected to NSA behind the scenes. Admiral Rogers running these operations, working with what people call Q, the source, very high intelligence running operations. Now a breaking report is in now that saying that from Florida, Joseph D. Ganova, he was investigating the Russia hoax back in when Trump first ran for election in 2016-17. He was investigating this. Now Joseph D. Ganova is now a counselor working directly with investigations, prosecutions, directly with the Department of Justice down in Florida. And one of their main witnesses is Admiral Rogers from the 17 operations. So that's very important to understand that this was a long time coming. NSA knew what was happening everywhere with the election fraud, who was all involved, different countries involved. Now in this report that's coming out of Florida, connected to Joseph D. Ganova, is that you have the UK, United Kingdom, that's involved in the stolen elections. Now you have new countries that's going to be coming in, all the way to Spain. It's going to keep on growing. And the reports that I'm hearing is that it's also going to be connected over to Italy, because Italy was using their satellites also. These powerful satellites that they're using with Mossad down inside of Italy, connected to the Vatican. So that's all eventually going to come out. But the first part of this is that they're going to show that Ukraine, United Kingdom, Spain is all involved inside of the stolen elections. And it's going to connect to several different countries inside of the European Union of the stolen elections. Now we hear that inside of these NATO talks behind the scenes, Trump is letting them know that they're going to move forward on all of these different operations. Because the reason why NATO is really important inside of the stolen elections is because the military having different network systems inside of all of these NATO countries. And these NATO countries for a long time, they have very advanced computer systems, quantum computers, powerful networks connected to AI systems, and they were allowed to cover up all the election fraud. A lot of different generals, people in charge, a lot of different leaders inside of NATO country, were intentionally using all of these different military computers inside of NATO, to kind of cover up all of this stuff. And they were actually a part of all of this stuff of the election fraud in several countries inside of Europe, all the way to Romania. So this is all going to keep on growing, what Trump is talking about behind the scenes over in Romania. And as you know, eventually it's all going to lead towards Israel, that they were actually involved. Nobody's talking about this, but this is where everything is eventually going to lead to. Israel saved for last. Everybody kept saying that Trump's being controlled, all these different operations, but Trump is stopping everything slowly. and everything had to be in a certain way, like what they were doing with Turkey. Inside of Turkey, they were dismantling all of these different terrorist groups, different operations inside of Turkey the past 2 years. Now the reports are finally out, thousands and thousands of arrests. So that was what they were planning, the communist operations, the Khazarian operations, the different networks connected to the globalists. They were trying to overthrow Turkey, these operations, slowly turn it into behind the scenes, the communist operations running this huge, gigantic country. So that's what was happening. Now, Trump aligning himself with Erdogan, giving him missile defense systems, lifting the sanctions so the money, the wealth can come back in, connected to the United States financial system, the markets. This is all planned for the future to open all of this back up. So it's very interesting what Trump is doing, destroying the operations of the Khazarians, all the way to the Zion operations and the Cabal operations. So that's what's happening. Very interesting that Admiral Rogers, being a witness, eventually later on being a state's witness to all of the election fraud, connected all the way back to 2016, to Russiagate, connected to, even how General Flynn, that they were going after General Flynn, Crossfire Hurricane. This whole gigantic operation, I keep telling you that, well, a lot of people told you from the inside, so Admiral Rogers is going to pop back up. You had this part to where Admiral Rogers and Trump, they put a distance in between them. Admiral Rogers didn't agree with, what Trump was doing, certain things, and, he didn't want to be a part of it. And that was just, that was a huge, gigantic show. No matter what was happening, he kept saying Admiral Rogers is a huge part of these projects, including placing Trump as president of the United States. So you're watching this huge, gigantic show where Musk, Trump, they kind of go their own ways, separate 2017. Musk joins the Democratic Party. And I keep telling everybody, he's coming. He's going to come back. This is not what it seems like. The same thing with Admiral Rogers, even though, these years, some people say, well, Admiral Rogers doesn't like Trump. The whole thing is this, a show. It's been a charade. Now Admiral Rogers coming in to be, a witness. He's already a witness that's already inside the records, inside of the Florida records. But eventually he's going to be a state's witness. So this is how huge this is. The United Kingdom, the House of London, is going to be part of the stolen elections of 2020. And it's, wow, it's big. Ukraine, that's big. So now you can see that what's happening, Trump, what's happening inside of Ukraine. Eventually in time, next year, say in this time, Trump is going to say that we found a lot of evidence that Ukraine was involved inside the election fraud. Then they'll talk about the bioweapons, all the money that was being funneled that way, cryptocurrency, taxpayer money, all of this stuff about the money laundering operations. But to be a part of stolen elections, going against Trump, this is an act of war of what was really happening. Now Trump is going to have ammunition to say, what, we're not going to support what's going on with Ukraine. Now we know that these different countries, MI6 was involved. The UK was all involved with this. Now we know why that Spain, didn't want the United States military to be connected to their operations. They wouldn't even let the United States fly over certain parts of their regions, for the operations when they were heading towards Iran. So slowly, these operations of NATO, there's still a massive collapse. It's going to show the corruption of NATO countries all involved, and then the military operations behind the scenes using their computers, whether it was in the UK, whether it was in Spain, whether it's in different parts of Europe. They were covering up all of this stuff, election fraud, corruption connected to the United States. But not only that, connected to all of Europe, different regions, election fraud. So this is what's being discussed behind the scenes over at NATO, and Trump is putting people in check. And a lot of reports are saying that for almost a month now, Netanyahu isn't in contact with Trump. Trump was blocking all the calls. There's massive panic. And then you heard that Pete Hegseth from the Pentagon was going over to meet with Netanyahu, just a few days ago. Now all of that was canceled. The flights, the meeting was all canceled now, because Israel is trying to say Iran's a new threat. They have different kind of weapons. They have bioweapons now. We need to get ahead of this. There's bioweapons there. So Trump cutting off the intelligence over to Israel. Pentagon shutting off everything directly from Pete Hegseth. Nobody's answering Netanyahu's calls. At the same time, Trump is aligning himself with Turkey, and they're going to ensure that Israel will not capture the oil lines that Turkey is kind of controlling over in Palestine, those operations and all of those different rigs. So there's so much to talk about this, because there's going to be so much developments of what's going on. So that's the huge report, is that Joseph D. Ganova, a counselor now working with the Department of Justice, Attorney General of the United States, and they stumble it says, the team have stumbled upon a massive hive of foreign election interference involving Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and 2016 elections, and cooperating witnesses, Mike Rogers, head of the NSA. So it's just going to keep on growing, guys. This huge story that's going to involve the Clintons, it's going to involve all the NGOs, it's going to involve the communist operations that were funding this. Now, eventually, when that standoff comes with China, the communist operations from China that the globalist operations are controlling from the Vatican, really, connected to the Jesuits, those operations that control the Rothschilds. The creation is that eventually China, United States is going to go to the standoff. And Xi, behind the scenes, they've already made a deal with Trump that, okay, we're going to have this massive standoff. And then eventually we're going to find out that United States connected CCP, connected to communist operations, they were involved in election fraud. And Xi's going to say, I didn't know about that. Now I want to see who's part of this, because, this is affecting our economy. This is affecting a world war that could happen, that we're at this moment, where we're coming into a nuclear standoff. I'm just kind of giving you an insight of what Xi is expected to say, what he's expected to go through in the future, to say that I didn't know that there was stolen elections, that we were involved, our military is involved. This is really big. And then eventually Xi is going to have to arrest the different parts of the party publicly and have public tribunals connected to stolen elections. All those tribunals are also going to be taking place inside the United States. Guys, the whole world is going military tribunals. Everything is being set up behind the scenes for tribunals inside of the United States. Tribunals already happening behind the scenes in China. But eventually, China, United States coming to a standoff again. And then this election fraud is all going to come out even more. And then it's going to grow to all of these different operations from China, communist funding, a lot of different NGOs. It's going to keep on growing. And eventually Xi is going to say, we need to stop this. We want a peaceful world. And we need to end all of these communist operations. So this is the opening door that you guys can't really see. I said, the real plan is Trump. Russia, like I said for a long time, they're going to take China apart. And they're going to take this apart to make it all these provinces almost independent countries, but they're still going to be united like a union. What's going to happen over in China. And this is all leading to that. Everything's coming in certain stages. So this is the huge intel report that's coming out. And eventually all of this is going to lead over to cybersecurity agencies all the way to Ukraine, all the way into Europe, back to the United States. It's going to be connected to election frauds and be connected to cybersecurity companies like CrowdStrike. So there's massive talk on all of this information that I'm kind of giving you guys on, and I'm sure that somebody will give a great report about what's really happening with CrowdStrike. So that's what's kind of happening. Trump taking over NATO. Trump letting NATO know that they weren't really there. Some of these countries like Spain telling them that you guys weren't there. The UK telling them that you guys weren't there when we needed you. You wanted to help until the war was over with Iran. So Trump was kind of a little way in berating NATO when he was there. But then at the same time, like I said, NATO, all the different members, commanders, saying, Trump, we love you. And Trump was talking about that, saying, everybody's telling me that they love me. But there's reports that's coming out. This is the funny reports is that this is the open wires. You can find this on the internet. That they found all of these reports from intelligence agencies from the UK throughout NATO countries, and they were coming together to try to, in a certain way, to sway Trump's mind around, to move him around. So they were creating these intelligence reports almost in a way to brainwash him, to see what they could do, to get to his mind, whether it was investments, whether it was feeding his ego. They had created all of these intelligent reports. So Trump kind of, in a certain way, he kind of makes a statement to it. He says, everybody's telling me that they love me, that they're happy that I'm here. I'm hearing this a lot. Maybe they're trying to get to me. Maybe it's working. He kind of makes this kind of statement. But what he's talking about the intelligence report. All of these different countries were trying to work on him, trying to sway his mind using all of these different tactics of intelligence agencies. So that's kind of funny. Now, I don't know how to say this, but I told you Seth Rich was going to come back. And for new people viewing, people barely learning about, Seth Rich was working for Hillary Clinton, Podesta. He was working for the Democratic Party in the United States. And then he gets killed. He gets shot in the early morning hours, like execution style. The reason why that's important is because he's the person that was giving all the information, the Hillary Clinton emails, Podesta emails. He was giving that, over to Julian Assange, and Julian Assange was giving out that information, and everybody heard about the corruption, Hillary Clinton, so much different stuff. And that was Julian Assange WikiLeaks. And he was getting direct information from directly underneath Hillary Clinton, Podesta, and that was Seth Rich. Now they found out Seth Rich was the person who was leaking the information, leaking all the different data from all the computer servers. Now he gets killed, Seth Rich. I told you many times, that the Seth Rich story is coming back. Intelligence agencies are talking about Seth Rich. Behind the scenes, very powerful people are talking about Seth Rich. Seth Rich is coming back, the real story of what really happened to him. Then that's going to open up the Podesta, the connection to the pedo stuff, connected to a lot of things. Eventually, all of this is going to start to open back up. So it's not coincidence when you see like people talking about the Anthony Weiner laptop. It's coming in the past 2 weeks. Senate, Congress, people are talking about the Anthony Weiner laptop. investigations happening behind the scenes already into the Anthony Weiner laptop. A lot of different investigations into Seth Rich, what had really happened. Now, all of a sudden, right, Kash Patel comes up and says, okay, guys, we found another secret room, and it had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers on the Seth Rich, what had really happened. So, I kind of said that, I kind of alluded to that. I said, they're going to find more stuff on the Seth Rich stuff, even the Epstein stuff. They're going to find more stuff. There's going to be a bunch of files, hidden rooms, that this is all going to come out. But different reports from intelligence agencies are saying that the United States military has everything that's been going on for a long time. That's what we've been talking about, to tell you that the United States military has everything. In many different ways, they have everything. Whether it was because, whether it's because that there's super intelligence that can gather all the information, powerful, different living computers that they really have that can gather all information in real time. This system that they have, this is what Trump kind of refers to as the Golden Dome, behind the scenes. It's kind of the Stargate. The way we kind of know it is the super advanced communication systems that's connected to plasma energy, plasma living light energy that can collect information in live time, everything that you can imagine it can do. So whether they're using that, or else this young kid, Aaron Schwartz, that I was telling you about, that he hacked into the MIT servers directly. And I told you that when he hacked into the MIT servers directly, and he was getting all of this data, and he didn't know what he was really doing, right? Because he was getting all the data from around the world, everything inside the internet from all the different countries, because all the information throughout the world, it goes through MIT, then it goes to different countries, or it goes back to their countries. Those operations connected to the internet that this young kid at Aaron Schwartz was tapping into. Then eventually a lot of countries were looking to kill him. Different militaries, intelligence agencies looking for him. And that set up a national alarm, that different countries want to know who this kid was. It could have set off war. It could have set off a lot of things connected to military protocols that they know that now military was hunting for a United States citizen, and they're willing to come into the United States to assassinate whatever they need to do to get rid of this person. The United States military had to secure what was going to happen, and it set off a lot of protocols. That includes the United States military getting the information of what this kid was looking at. And this kid found all the pedo stuff from Cambodia to different countries, to the House of London, stuff that was recorded even back then on ledgers, back to the late 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, to all the families around the world, to all the elite families, to old bloodlines, then to the whole financial system connected to the Jesuits. And this kid found everything that was connected to that, all the way into China, all the way into Cambodia, all the way into India. So when this kid found all of this stuff, now legally, the United States military can collect all of that information, and that set off military protocols to where they could now legally use all of this for evidence, store the information that they got it legally, and it could be used for different military operations, connected to storm operations legally, connected to secret executive orders that Trump had signed, giving military power, that giving over powerful power to the military. So it's kind of confusing because I did a big video on that, and I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but I'm trying to tell you that this young kid got all the information on the world in the cabal. Now these military people are trying to kill him, and it sets off, this state of alert inside of the Pentagon, inside the United States. They have to protect the United States citizen. So they come, whether they came to him, whatever happened, they got all the information that he had. But of course, you have to understand it in this way. Admiral Rogers, the military, all of their advanced systems, they already had all the information already. They've already had everything. But they can't tell anybody that they have all the records from different countries. They can't tell people that they have all the information from the United States, because that would be illegal, to get all that information illegally and then to use it to run military operations. So they had to do things legally that could set off military protocols, secret executive orders to give power to the military to start storm operations throughout the world. That's the most that I can kind of put that onto. So this stuff with Seth, with Seth Rich, it's all going to come back. But the military already has everything. Admiral Rogers already knows everything about the stolen elections. Everything you're kind of seeing now are all of these stages being put together. Seth Rich coming back, connected to the DNC, connected to the Clintons, connected to Epstein, eventually connected to communist operations. Everything's going to keep on moving. And then the communist operation, whether they're talking about Soros, Roy Neville Singham, a bunch of different people running Antifa operations, all of these different groups throughout the United States connected to NGOs, communist operations. There's a reason why everything's coming out. The election fraud, this Epstein stuff is still going to keep on building, guys. It's all going to come back. So you can kind of see it, these world storm operations, and it's getting really serious, and things are moving really, really quickly. A lot of grand jury indictments, secret grand jury indictments, a lot of arrests is happening behind the scenes, different countries. You're finally learning about a lot of different arrests inside of Turkey of what was really happening behind the scenes. It's big. So then let's kind of get to this, just to kind of get to this. We have to talk about this because it's getting fascinating. At first, I didn't want to talk about the Erica Kirk, the Charlie Kirk stuff, because I knew it was going to be a bunch of, it's a show. It's just going to confuse people and stuff, but we have to talk about what's being discovered, okay, guys? And it's very interesting. I have to tell you, it's very interesting. First of all, we have to say that, that Benny Johnson getting briefings directly from the Pentagon, because Benny Johnson has stated this himself, that he gets briefings. Now, Benny Johnson, shows some of the videos to say that Tyler Robinson is there walking around the university. New videos have emerged. It's Tyler Robinson. Candace Owens is wrong. We need to put all of this to bed now. We know that he's there. That the shooting happened. There's evidence now. We need to prosecute this and just get this over with. Stop the conspiracy stuff. So Benny Johnson puts that message out, But the video that he's talking about, it's very pixelated.
Now what do we see?
This is an image looking across the parking lot to the Losi building, and Mr. Robinson is appearing on the exterior staircase, which gives access to the Losi building roof and the area where the railing was.
And again, let's break that image into quadrants. Where would he be located if you broke it into quadrants?
It's in the top right, and the individual can be seen moving under the notations that are on the video.
Okay. And what time is this?
It's just afternoon, about 12:15.
On what day?
On September 10th, 2025.
Okay.
All you see is this little blurry thing. You can't tell if it's walking, crawling, walking backwards. You can't see it, and you can't even tell that it's him. But, whatever is happening, it's getting very interesting. But I can tell you, that they're pushing this forward, behind the scenes, the military, kind of getting people kind of angry, through Benny Johnson giving out reports, different conservative channels pushing the idea. Now, what's happening inside the hearings? I have to tell you about this because it's kind of shocking to me. It's kind of shocking to everybody that's going through, the hearings, the process, the videos. What's interesting is that there's a bald guy and 3 other people that are driving Tyler Robinson's video, the evening of the shooting when police were searching for his video, for his car. So they're trying to look around for his car. But the statements, the reports that comes out inside the hearings is that there was a bald guy with 3 people that were not captured, but captured on video, that they were inside of Tyler Robinson's car, and that was all kind of hidden, that information.
And do you remember that the Nobles told you that the driver of the vehicle was bald?
I do remember that being in the report, yes.
And you didn't mention that today when you were talking about that ring camera, did you?
I did not.
It's an interesting thing to leave out of your discussion of the whole situation now, isn't it? So there was a bald guy driving Tyler Robinson's car with 3 other people in the car the night of the shooting. And that's been in the report all along. And they knew that all along. And he avoided mentioning it.
Now everybody's like, who are those people? And this time, after the shooting, people are trying to look for this car, looking for the lone gunman. Now there's people driving around his car. So that comes out inside of the court records, inside the hearings. Now, another thing that's kind of interesting is that there's a cartridge, a bullet that's found on top of the building. And the lead investigator is saying that, that it could have come from, it came from one of the law enforcement, that bullet that was found on top of one of the buildings. It's very interesting because the statement that he says is that, the way they're trying to play this off is that, well, the bullet must have fell out of the gun of one of the police officers, one of the snipers, that was on top of the building. It was one of the police officer sniper's bullet. Because the reason it fell out is that they were clearing the gun, chambering it, taking it out, taking the bullet out to make sure it was empty, and then the bullet must have fallen out, So they haven't shown a picture of the bullet. But it's very interesting that they find this bullet on top of a building, and they're trying to cover it up now. And nobody even knew that there was a bullet that was found on top of a building. So you have a lot of different people on the internet already speculating, talking about this, to say, well, that's not how the law enforcement works. When there's active shooters, there's danger. Different police departments all around the United States. The police, their guns, it's always chambered. There's always a bullet ready. So that way, if something happens, a threat, an immediate threat, they don't have to go back, get ready things, unlock things, and get it ready. That it's already ready when they take out the gun. It's already chambered. So you have different law enforcement agencies talking about this, retired police officers, and then even people in the military that have trained police law enforcement agencies saying that's not how, that's not what happens during a shooting, during a huge threat. Moreover, a lot of police departments don't do that. They don't unchamber the gun, clean it out, make sure there's nothing in there, and put it back together, take out the bullet. He goes, that's not how things are done. So people are really talking about this, speculating about this. And then also, how did this happen? There's a bullet up on there. So everybody's saying there's a second shooter. And this was already hitting about a month ago. There was some people saying that they saw the reports, there's a second shooter. So we'll see where all this goes.
So when you see the funny haircut with this sort of weird accent, that's who we're talking about. The lead investigator for the State Bureau of Investigation.
There also a bullet found on another building?
I believe an unfired bullet had been found on another building at some point during my time there on September 10th. Yeah.
So, whoa, dude. Hold up. There was an unfired bullet, not just a casing, not a spent casing, but an unfired bullet found on another rooftop on September 10th. And no one thought to mention that? That never got brought up? Because obviously, you need a fucking explanation for that. Bullets don't just jump onto rooftops out of nowhere, especially on college campuses, especially at the scene of a murder investigation. Obviously, that bullet had to get there somehow. Then the explanation of how maybe that bullet got there is given, and it's even fucking weirder.
Which building was that, sir?
I don't recall.
Was that considered a scene that was worth preserving?
It was not. My recollection is that that was accounted for as an ejected cartridge from an officer who had cycled his rifle.
They're going to go into this a little bit more in a second here. But what he just said is it was accounted for as a cartridge that was ejected from a police officer's rifle when he cycled. Meaning, apparently, there was police officers on rooftops with long guns, with rifles, allegedly. We have no knowledge of that. There's no reason to believe why. Like, A, they already had someone in custody right away, George Zinn, on the day of. And then B, once they determined that it wasn't George Zinn, there was no shooting going on. The campus was clear. So why would there even be police officers on other rooftops with rifles?
Now that video is so grainy, you know, it's so grainy. It's a large, you know, a lot of times you can't see it at the start of the video, but there's a part where it's missing again. 5 minutes of the video is missing. The part to where he gets on top of the building to where he's going to the shooting, it cuts 5 minutes and then it finally shows that he's moving, and it's just a little pixelated, but the professionals are saying he's laying down, he's actually crawling now, he's going to go do the shooting now. So there's a lot of massive confusion of kind of what's happening, and people are watching the videos. Sometimes it looks like he has something in his leg on the right side. So his leg is stiff when he's walking. One leg has the gun, and this other leg can bend, but this leg can't bend. And then in the next clips, it's the other leg that's bending, and it's this leg that looks like it has the gun. And people are talking about this, like, what's going on? He's switching legs. Which legs is bending him? So that's kind of the main stuff that people are kind of talking about, is the bullet. And what's really interesting is that at 9:24 a.m., Tyler Robinson parks, you know, at the campus. And he parks in a part of the campus that you have to have certain keys. Only certain people can get this because it's a private parking area. So you have to have certain keys in order to park there. And now this is the strange part that people are really going to start to speculate on, because this was reported inside the hearings. At 9:24, Tyler Robinson parks inside the gated parking lot that requires keys, special access. He parks there. Immediately after he parks there, he goes to meet people from Turning Point USA. And then after that, he leaves again. Goes back out and he leaves. But the whole time, whether he was getting food near the university, different places, there's no close-up of his face absolutely anywhere. And one of the things that's still strange to this day is how they, you know, where the assassination attempt happened, the whole place was blocked over, paved over. Everything was absolutely transformed. And they were asking the investigator who allowed that to happen, who allowed to have this place where, you know, this event took place, you know, the investigations that's supposed to take place even after the assassination, who allowed this area to be paved over the construction to happen immediately, and the lead investigator says, I don't know. He's not interested in who allowed this to happen. But a lot of reports, the company who had it paved have been on podcasts, and they said that this was on a Sunday afternoon. There was a call to the company to say, we need you guys to do this on Sunday. If you can do it today, we want to pay you guys to overpave all of this stuff, move everything, get rid of everything. So this guy said this was really strange, and he understood that it came all the way from the higher ups, from the governor, for this be allowed to happen, to overpay for the Charlie Kirk assassination happen. So it's very interesting that the investigator doesn't care who allowed this to happen, to cover up the whole scene. And the strange thing is also, Dairy Queen, to where, Tyler Robinson was at. Immediately when they found out that he was there, a week later, the whole Dairy Queen disappeared. All the videos, all the cameras, the family just packed up and moved. Everybody was gone. And they said, well, we don't have any more recordings of the video. There's no video of Tyler Robinson. And also, all of those vehicles that he was walking by throughout the university, even inside the parking, whether he was there early in the morning, scouting out the campus, going different places. There's no video close-up of him in any way. Even all the vehicles that was parked inside the parking garage, people leaving in and out, there's no video. And that's really strange too, because everybody that attended the event, all the videos are missing. Everything is absolutely missing. And I told you that what was really interesting was during the Trump assassination attempt over in Butler, Pennsylvania, immediately, this was at a small little location, Butler, Pennsylvania, right? A small little area. Immediately, a lot of people that were further in the back, all of their videos disappeared. Everything began to disappear from the internet of the shooting. Then eventually people understood that the military intelligence was saying, the wires was saying that it's CrowdStrike. And then eventually CrowdStrike, these operations with their systems shut down airports immediately after that. Certain systems, their servers, their computers shut down, data disappeared. And then the same thing with a lot of different phones, because they're running operations from phones that you have that connects over to different phone companies inside the United States. That's also in cooperation with CrowdStrike, the security agencies, cybersecurity operations, and subsidiary operations. Oh, I'm messing up my words there. So very confusing, very strange of what's happening. CrowdStrike inside of this. CrowdStrike now inside of Ukraine, helping facilitate, stolen elections. Very interesting that this is all going to come out. Lots of different things on the stolen elections. So talking on that front, during the shooting of Tyler Kirk, everybody in attendance had phones. None of those videos came out, none of it went viral. Everything just kind of disappeared. Now there's no photos of this kid up close, no videos of him up close. Different places eating near the university in the area. Nothing, even though they can track him to different places that he was at. So that's one of the things is people are like, wow, 924 arrives on campus, gated parking area that needs keys. Then immediately he meets people from Turning Point USA. Then he gets on out of there. And then the 5 minutes missing video is also missing. So that's what's kind of happened that we really kind of had to talk about on that. It's going to make people confusing, this case. Get people confused, I want to say. Lots of strange stuff. But what we do know, what I've been telling you really the real truth is behind the scenes, that these are huge military operations. Eventually, the truth of what was going on with Israel, instigating war, different places in the Middle East, connected over to Turkey, things that they were trying to do, terrorist operations connected to NGOs funding these operations. They're connected to election fraud in different countries. This is all moving forward. Then the Epstein stuff is all going to come back. Then the operations inside the United States that's connected to Epstein, intelligence, corruption connected to senators, world leaders, connected to Israel. This is all going to keep on moving forward. So what I can say and what I've been telling you behind the scenes is that there's these huge, gigantic, massive operations that's connected to Candace Owens, connected to Trump, connected to Admiral Rogers pulling a lot of strings, to General Flynn, connected to so many different countries running military operations that expose the cabal, the election fraud, which is one of the biggest pandemics in the world, because the election fraud puts powerful people into place to protect the pedos, to cover up all the investigations into the trafficking, drug trade, corruption, stolen election, money laundering operations. And that's what stolen elections, do. That's why it's very important to expose this. And Trump, over in NATO, giving huge drops, telling them, this is what's going to happen. We're going to expose all of this. UK's involved. We know about this now. Ukraine's involved. Spain's involved. Italy's involved with their satellites. It's big, guys. This is a situation update for everyone.